please. Got it.
And we have Anna also.
Hello.
Hi.
Hello, welcome.
Hello, good afternoon. We're just allowing people to connect, come in from the waiting room, and we'll be starting in just a moment.
Hi, everyone. I'm sorry. I'm
Hi,
just
Anna.
trying to understand my camera and my.
We see a chair, Anna.
Yeah. I'm just trying to understand. Okay, let me just. Now I'm
Good.
here.
Yeah, we see you.
Yeah. Yes, and can you hear me well? Because I'm having problems with with the connection.
We
So
hear you
everything
very
okay at the
well.
moment?
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
There are still a few people coming through, but I'd say in about 30 seconds, I think we should start. Celine, would you like to kick off?
Sure. Thank you very much, Miriam, and welcome to all participants. My name is Celine Kochman. I'm the head of the division in charge of entrepreneurship, SME, and tourism at the OECD. It's really my pleasure to open this fourth webinar, the OECD platform on financing SMEs for sustainability, which is actually the last webinar of the year, which is also a very special event in our webinar series because this event marks the 1-year anniversary of the OECD platform on financing SMEs for sustainability. So it's a 1-year anniversary, and over the past year, there has been a lot happening on the initiative and through our different events, through the analytical work that we've carried out, team under Miriam has carried out. We've made progress in strengthening the knowledge base on the topic of financing SMEs for sustainability, on the drivers, on the challenges, on the policies. And I think we've gained a better understanding of financing instruments and approaches for the green transition of SMEs. But more importantly, this date is very important as well, because the context of today is that we are organizing this webinar during the COP27. And this is a COP which is taking place in a very grave and serious context. Climate scientists are clear that we are now at a critical moment. If we do not accelerate the decarbonization of the global economy, the consequences from climate change will be very severe and potentially irreversible. Following a year of record-breaking temperatures and climate-related disasters that are growing both in frequency and in severity, the COP is really the time to accelerate actions by both the public and the private sector to reduce carbon emissions and limit the rise in global temperatures. It is also the moment to make good on some of the previous commitments taken by countries. Developed and developing countries alike will have to take very strong actions on both the mitigation and the adaptation fronts. And this means that considerable financing will need to be mobilized to close the gap faced both by developing countries, mostly by developing countries, but also by developed countries. And in this area, the OECD and international monitoring efforts of climate finance show the progress made, notably over the past 10 years, to reach the various targets, notably of the $100 billion under the UNFCCC. But they also show that the efforts so far fall short of the climate finance goal, and they fall short of achieving the necessary emission reduction objectives. If you look at recent reports, in particular the Climate Policy Initiative report, you'll see that they estimate that despite the doubling in climate finance in the last decade, reaching climate objectives would require climate investment to increase at least 7 times by the end of this decade. And notably, if you focus on the private sector investment, if it is increasing along public investment, it is not at the scale and speed necessary for the transition. And within this, obviously, there is the question of how the business sector, and in particular, the SMEs, the smaller companies, are investing and financing their transition. And this is a really critical question. And really at the core of the initiative that we are leading. And of course, that question is now taking place in the midst of a global energy crisis, coming on the heels of a global pandemic. This crisis has compounded the strain on the budgets of government, on households, and on businesses. And the risk appetite of financial markets and institutions has also taken a hit. At the OECD, we are closely monitoring the economic developments and the impacts of the pandemic and the energy crisis on the SME sector. And we're also tracking government policy responses in this area. And just to mention that we are developing actually a new paper that is looking into the government responses to the current energy price crisis that will be discussed at the upcoming meeting of the Committee on SME and Entrepreneurship in 10 days. And what we can see through, or what we are showing through that paper, is that while initially the policy responses focus very strongly on energy-intensive sectors, where energy costs account for more than 3% of turnover, with the crisis persisting, policy measures have now expanded to more companies, including SMEs, notably through generalized energy price caps and tax reductions in the energy bills. And so while the provision of cyclical support is critical to enable small businesses and entrepreneurs to weather the crisis, we must also do more to turn the crisis into a catalyst for change and to prevent the freezing effect on the green transition that shielding businesses from increasing energy prices may have. And many governments are doing so, to be fair. They're just doing that currently through new or enhanced policy measures. In some instances, fiscal support measures have been coupled with green incentives within the same policy packages. And we have a couple of examples of that. Typically, the federal government of Austria is providing incentives for businesses to invest in solar and in wind power and to purchase electric and hybrid vehicles, in addition to offering energy tax rebates. Another example, for example, in Ireland, several measures, grants, investment loans, and credit guarantees aim to encourage the green transition of SMEs, in addition to helping them pay their higher energy bills. And we can mention several other examples in France, in Spain, and so on. So today's discussion offers the opportunity to discuss a bit this tension and how the opportunity to push the needle further on these issues. We will be discussing the various implications of the energy crisis for SME demand for sustainable finance. How can we turn the higher demand for energy efficiency into an impetus for sustainable investments? How are SMEs approaching the issue? And what role can policymakers, financial institutions, and other actors play to foster these investments? So both looking at the demand and the supply side, as we've been doing from the beginning of the initiative. So without further ado, let me hand over to Miriam Corinne, who is leading this initiative at the OECD, to introduce our event and our great speakers in the discussion. Miriam, the floor is yours.
Thanks very much, Celine, and welcome to everybody. As Celine mentioned, tackling the energy crisis that we face today should not deter us from accelerating the green transformation of our economies. And in fact, the energy crisis provides us a very stark reminder that not only is our dependence on fossil fuels harmful to the planet, but it's also a source of considerable vulnerability to supply shocks. And this is particularly the case for SMEs. So in many ways, this is actually a make or break moment. We've heard that before, but I think, the situation just keeps getting more and more serious and critical. So we really must leverage this crisis to catalyze investments by SMEs in clean and energy saving solutions. But there are a number of challenges that we need to overcome, including governments, SMEs, and other actors to make this a reality. I was actually on a panel this morning where I heard about an experience in Malta of a specific support scheme that was put out to help SMEs with energy efficiency, and actually it had zero take-up. So there were no businesses actually requesting the support. So this is just one example of some of the challenges in making sure that the support that is provided is well tailored and actually meets the needs of the target population. So today's panel offers the opportunity to hear more about how these actors perceive the situation, what challenges we must overcome, and what actions we can take to effectively turn the crisis into an opportunity for green investments and increased energy efficiency. And we're very, very lucky and privileged today to have a very knowledgeable panel of experts who I will now turn to. We're delighted to welcome Ana Costa Paula from the Directorate General for Economic Activities of the Government of Portugal, Gerhard Hummer of SME United, and Peter Sweatman of Climate Strategy and Partners. Welcome to you all. It's a pleasure to have you on today's panel. So now I would like to turn to our first speaker. So that's Ana Costa Paula. Ana is the head of the Business Policy Unit in the Directorate General for Economic Activities in the Ministry of Economy and Maritime Affairs of Portugal. Ana is responsible for fostering the creation of favorable conditions for the development of entrepreneurship, competitiveness, innovation, sustainability, and internationalization of companies with a focus on SMEs and digital transformation, and also works on the implementation in Portugal of the Small Business Act of the European Union and is very closely involved with the SME Envoy Network. Ana, welcome. We would like to understand better the context you're facing in Portugal. What impacts has the energy crisis been having on Portuguese SMEs so far? Are you seeing an impact on the demand for investments in energy efficiency and greening more generally? Or on the other hand, is the heightened uncertainty and a difficult liquidity situation holding them back? We'd also be interested to hear from you about what the government of Portugal is doing to boost SME capacity to invest in greening in this very challenging context. Ana, you have the floor.
Thank you, Miriam, and good morning, good afternoon, evening, depending on where you are. Let me first start by congratulating OECD for the organization of this webinar, giving us the possibility to debate such timely issue. And of course, thank you for the invitation. I think it's clear to everyone that we are living very challenging times and a unique moment, I would say. We had to face a pandemic situation that we have never seen before, and we had to develop unprecedented efforts to help overcome its economic and social impacts. And then when we were starting to the post-pandemic phase, we were confronted with the brutal economic and social impacts resulting from the Russian invasion to Ukraine. This economic and social damage caused by this war is huge, firstly, for Ukrainian citizens, and also very significant for the world, for Europe, and for Europe's SMEs. They are most adversely affected than companies in other large economies due to the high exposure to the Russian market, which is geographically close and has been a major supplier, particularly of energy, and has been an important market for many SMEs. While the degree of dependency, of course, varies between member states, the effect of rising prices is felt everywhere, and energy price hikes, it's imposing significant burdens of large companies as well as SMEs. In this field, and as a first remark, I think it's essential to continue that European countries join forces and strengthen cooperation among themselves, reaffirming the European Union's single market and promoting its correct functioning. At the same time, we must aim to pursue the European goals of a green and digital transition, ensuring that we remain competitive at global level, also in line with the Sustainable Development Goals. Focus on my country. Portugal was no exception and has been suffering the impacts of high energy costs and inflation. Nevertheless, and according to the European economic forecast from last spring, we were one of the European Union countries least exposed to the direct effects of the war. The risks are mostly indirect, arising from raw materials prices, security of supply, and uncertainty about world demand. However, and despite the energy crisis and all challenges, we are want to continue to accelerate the energy transition, maintaining the ambition of the Paris Agreement on reducing greenhouse gas emissions while remaining firm in our environmental objectives. In this field, in the field of renewable energies, for example, the combined efforts of Portuguese governments, institutions, and companies contributed for the impressive results it already achieved. Renewable energy contributed around 59% to the generation of electricity consumed in the country last year. In this regard, we have set the goal of reaching 80% of electricity produced from renewable sources by 2030 and achieve carbon neutrality by 2050. In fact, last Tuesday, our Prime Minister in his speech at COP27 stressed that Portugal is studying the feasibility of bringing forward carbon neutrality to 2045, so 5 years less. To achieve these ambitious goals, and in this effort to endow companies and especially the industry with capacity and resilience, Portugal has in its recovery and resilience plan 38% of its total allocation focused on measures that support climate goals. Within this decarbonizing industry, the main goal is a paradigm shift in the use of resources with the support of low carbon process and technologies alongside a legal framework conducive to this transition. The first calls to support the decarbonization of industry have already closed, and we had 245 applications that are now under evaluation, representing an investment of more than 1.5 billion euros. A new call is now open until January with 150 million euros more focused on reducing consumption and energy efficiency as a response to the current crisis. Concerning the other pillars of our RRP, in the scope of the resilience pillar, the business capitalization and innovation component is highly relevant for simultaneously answering the need for the twin transition, focusing on two interrelated basic conditions, investment and innovation. Two important initiatives aiming to support collaborative projects are included in this component. We have mobilizing agendas for business innovation and the green agendas for business innovation, which differ only in the areas of intervention of the projects promoted. Regarding sustainable finance from a green finance perspective, and also in the context of capitalization of business innovation component of our RRP, the creation of the National Promotional Bank offers an opportunity to accelerate and catalyze the investment in decarbonization needed to meet these net zero targets. Looking at the support of Portugal to SMEs through this crisis and promoting their investments in sustainability to advance to net zero agenda, one of the first initiatives by the Portuguese government to tackle the increase of energy prices was the support program for gas-intensive industries, which was introduced in April 2022 to help companies, including SMEs, in gas-intensive sectors to non-reimbursable subsidies. Eligible companies needed to show that the purchase of natural gas accounted for at least 2% of their value of production in 2021, and that in 2022 they were paying for the purchase of natural gas at least twice as much as they were paying on average in 2021. In September, some changes to this measure were introduced, and adding the agro-food industry to the covered sectors, and increasing the rate of support from 30 to 40% of eligible costs. The maximum amount of support per company also increased from 400,000 to 500,000 euros. Also, the Portuguese national budget for 2023 includes some measures related to energy crisis. In particular, companies will be able to deduct from their corporate income tax the cost of gas with a surcharge of 20% over real costs. This measure cover 500,000 companies and will cost about 60 million euros. In addition, the government will reduce the taxation of electric vehicles by a rate between 2.5% and 15%, depending on the type of vehicle. And the measure will cover, estimate 12,500 companies and cost about 5 million euros. Finally, the budget law, the budget law for 2023 approved the transition towards a regulated gas market, whereby both households and business consumers agree on a fixed monthly gas price over the year. Also, the budget for this measure is around 60 million euros. Under our RRP and toward the net zero agenda, we can also highlight components dedicated to the sustainable economy, integrating a dimension on the circular economy. The target sectors are the textiles and clothing, shoe and natural resin industries. So far, of the approximately 3.1 billion euros envisaged for climate transition from 2022 until 2026, 53% have been approved so far, with 80% of funds already distributed to final and direct beneficiaries. Looking at the impact that energy crisis has had on Portuguese SMEs so far, and how it's impacting SMEs investment in energy efficiency and greening more generally, I would say that the greatest impact the energy crisis has had on Portuguese SMEs has been on the logistical component of doing businesses, largely due to the increasing cost of fuel transportation, which is a considerable portion of overall business costs. Regarding support to SMEs investment in energy efficiency and greening, and as it is deeply tied to the National Recovery and Resilience Plan and the national budget for the next year, objective impact is at the moment too complex to determine. Nevertheless, I think I could say that energy crisis is having a positive impact on the search for more sustainable solutions, less vulnerable to shocks, particularly in energy intensive sectors. Companies understand that the incorporation of green solutions contributes to the reduction of their production and transportation costs, positively impacting their cost effectiveness levels, their productivity, and naturally their environmental footprint. Nonetheless, we understand that SMEs' decisions to invest currently tend to accommodate more the immediate impact of the rising costs of energy rather than invest in energy efficiency. In light of this, the Portuguese government rolls out measures to balance these considerations, focusing more either on grants and fiscal measures to SMEs or subsidizing investments towards green transition. In terms of green financing, and even though the cost of green solutions associated with the development of technology have been declining over time, the truth is that the funding gap remains. Therefore, it remains a challenge to ensure the financial institutions support projects with positive impacts on the environment. Just to close, it's clear more than ever that economies that are better prepared to respond to new challenges of investments in green technology, decarbonization, sustainable solutions, new products, and business models can significantly improve their productivity levels, their resilience, and their competitiveness. So it's a goal that we need and must continue to pursue. So thank you.
Thank you very much, Anna. That was a very rich presentation. So I gather that the Portuguese government, of course, has incorporated already in the recovery plan from COVID many of these considerations, and that you've stepped in again in the face of the current crisis, both with short-term relief measures, but also incentives for longer-term investments through tax deductions in relation to acquiring electric vehicles, but also through a sectoral approach focusing on specific industries where SMEs are active, like textiles and clothing, and others that you mentioned. So thank you for that opening set of comments. Now I would like to turn to maybe to hear more the SME perspective on the recent developments, and I would like to introduce Gerhard Hummer, who is the Director for Economic and Fiscal Policy at the European Association of Craft, Small and Medium Enterprises, that's SME United. He is responsible for economic policy coordination, macroeconomic dialogue, monetary policy, and tax policy, as well as SME finance and other topics. Gerhard, you recently released the latest edition of the SME Business Climate Index and EU Craft and SME Barometer. Can you tell us what the survey indicates about the impact of this crisis on SME confidence, as well as on their appetite for investments in energy efficiency and greening? Have you seen a major shift in attitudes over the past several months as the energy crisis has dug in? And I'd also appreciate hearing your views and the views of your members on what public and private financial institutions, policymakers, and others can do to boost SME capacity to invest in greening in this very challenging context. Gerhard, please, you have the floor.
Thank you very much, Miriam, for this invitation. And I will just starting sharing the screen. To show you some slides. And as mentioned by you, I will start with some results of the latest SME barometer we published 4 weeks ago. Why it doesn't work? So why it doesn't work?
Gerhard, there is at the bottom of the page, there's like, or if you go to view and you should be able to, and it's not working?
No, now it's working.
Okay.
So now you should see it, isn't it?
It's not full screen, but we do see it, indeed.
Okay. Any idea how I can make it full?
If you put it in the bottom on the slide show format, it should take up the whole screen.
No clue what to do. Next slide.
If you want, I can go ahead and share the screen. I think I have the PowerPoint prompted.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay.
Okay,
If you
no
can
problem.
leave, I'm going to share. Stop sharing on your end, and I'll go ahead and share. Okay. Hold on a second.
Thank you.
Give me a
Okay.
second.
So as I said, in the meantime, we published 4 weeks ago this SME barometer, and the main results also related to the capacity of SMEs to invest in sustainable development. I will now present to you next to some other observations we are making during the last few months. So please, can you go to the first slide, please?
Can you see that?
Yes,
okay.
yes,
Okay.
perfect.
Good.
Yeah.
Okay. Good.
Okay. So what we see on the SME Business Climate Index is that the the downturn, which already started in spring or at the beginning of the year, has accelerated. However, we are still with the business confidence index above the 70%, which we see normally as the baseline for above its growth, below its recession. But we have to say at this moment that the collection of data for this barometer stopped very early in September. And if we would have continued a couple of weeks more with the collection, I'm quite sure the outcome would be more negative. The reason for this is, and please go to the next slide, that we on the one side see here up to the red dotted line that all business indicators next to investments have been positively developing during the first semester of 22, but the expectations for the second semester go sharply down. It means what we see in reality is that the outcome of the first semester in all dimensions was much better than expected, because in the beginning of the year, there was still the fears about Delta variant, about the Omicron variant, about new lockdowns, etc., etc. This has not been materialized, and this first semester went much, much better for SMEs than originally expected. However, this had no impact on investments, because the uncertainty ahead, especially after the outbreak of the war, was strong enough that they said, okay, we are now growing, we are very dynamic, but we are hesitating to invest because we don't know how the situation evolves in the second semester or in the next year. And therefore already for the results of the first semester, the investment outlook or the barometer for investment went down. And of course, if you look now into the expectations for the current semester, there is a sharp decrease for orders, there is a decrease for turnover, there's a decrease for further decrease on investments. The only area which is still in the positive sphere is employment, which we read mainly as let's say catch-up effect, that many SMEs complained over the last months that they don't find employees, and they are still hoping now, if the situation gets worse, to can fill their vacancies, which they are facing already since a certain period of time. They also what's coming down compared to the first semester is the price expectations. Here, I would not say this is a result of expecting price decreases. This is more a result of this less and less SMEs have the belief that they will be able to forward the higher costs to the market and the customers. So that means it's rather a sign of we will not be able to increase the prices, and not a sign that the prices are going down. Next slide, please. Yeah, here. Here you see very, very well the fact that the expectation, the results of the first semester in the red box here have been much, much better than expected. The overall situation plus 15%, turnover plus 6%, employment not much, because there was not the possibility to employ more, the lack of skills on the market. Prices up, and only the investments, even the investments in this positive environment were lower than expected, which is very, very rarely, because normally SME underestimate in the expectations the investments. And in this case, it was even more negative than expected, and the orders have also been quite stable. Just a last look into the sector division. Next slide, please. Here you see we have the barometer for manufacturing, construction, business services, and personal services. If you look to the second last results, the results for the first semester, you see that quite positive for construction and manufacturing, less positive, but okay for the services sector. And now the impact of the crisis and the expectations as regards the second semester are much more negative for manufacturing and construction, and less, the dynamic is less negative for the personal business services. The reason behind them is on the one side, of course, on the manufacturing side, the impact of the energy price crisis, but also the ongoing problems with supply chain disruptions. This both is also true for the construction sector. In the construction sector, we have an additional impact that the demand for, especially for private housing, is going down due to the fact that higher interest rates means higher costs for mortgages, and these higher financing costs plus higher prices is a situation where we expect a strong reduction of demand in the construction sector, especially for these smaller companies which are mainly active in renovation and building of private houses. So this is a little bit what we have seen from the figures we collected over summer. And now I would like to dig a little bit into further information we get from our member organizations, which are not as harmonized as the barometer story, but more anecdotal information. But it's very important from our point of view to understand what's going on the market. Next slide, please. So on the one side, what we see, of course, is there's still a legacy from the pandemic crisis, which is over-indebtedness in the balance sheets of the SMEs due to the fact that most of the support measures during the pandemic crisis have been liquidity support, which have to be paid back once. But we also see still ongoing problems with the supply chain disruptions, with higher transport costs, logistics costs, and the lack of skills. This is still problems which we have seen already during the pandemic and are not fully solved when the energy crisis really came in. Then what we see during the autumn now is that more and more SMEs are reporting that their fixed price contracts for energy supply comes to an end and they have to get new contracts. Most of the time they are not able to get fixed price contracts anymore. They have to do floating contracts, and SMEs are confronted reporting price increases up to 10 times or 1,000% energy prices, which is of course of companies, even if they have only 2-3% energy costs, much above the profit margins, and on the same time only 1/3 in some countries, 20% in some countries, 40%, but in average 1/3 of the SMEs, we have figures report that they are able to forward the price increases to the customers. The other 2/3 are at the risk of making losses, are reducing their production or stop their production. And this means that if there are not fast or not early, quickly compensation measures, the SMEs will face a recession towards the end of the year. And therefore, it is so important now that the member states coming in with these crisis support measures, which you have mentioned Austria before, you have mentioned other countries. I know from the European Commission that they are on a daily basis now, the member states notifying support schemes for SMEs. And this is now the crucial moment if we want to avoid really a crash towards the end of the year. What is clear as now as regards the investment in sustainability is that as the pandemic was a huge push for SMEs to invest in digitalization, it in principle is also a huge push for SMEs to invest in energy efficiency, in energy savings, in renewables, etc., etc. So this, the principle, the crisis will be a trigger to do more towards sustainability. The big question is, and this is my last slide I want to show you, is what are the barriers and what hinders SME to do this. So please, the next slide, please. If you want, so we can differentiate with 4 different types of barriers. The one side, it's the regulatory barrier. SMEs complain a lot that if they want to do a decision now about the sustainability investment, and if you want to be SME neutral or at least strong contribute to the 2030 targets, you have to do the investments now. But the regulatory environment is not clear enough for SMEs. They don't know if you buy now a certain type of car. If it's this car, they can enter the city centers next in 2 years' time. If they buy now some new burner for their bakery, they don't know how long they can use them, etc., etc. So there's a lot of complaints about not enough regulatory certainty to make an investment decision. And the second complaint is that there are too complex and too long-lasting procedures to get the permits for new technologies, for changing the technology, etc., etc. So this is the regulatory side, is the permitting processes and regulatory certainty. Then on the supply side, if an SME wants to decide to put some solar panels or photovoltaic panels on the roof, or do something similar like this, and they call a company, and the company tells them, okay, next 2 years I am fully booked, you can come in 2 years' time, then it is very frustrating. So we have here lack of skilled workforce, lack of material, which is of course also to do with the supply chain disruptions, or we have a higher demand as the market can provide. So here SMEs could do more, or are willing to do more than they show at the moment, but they are holding back by supply side restrictions. But of course, on the same side, there are also demand side barriers, which go to the uncertainty about how the development is in future, the fear of recession, which holds them back. There's are we able to survive this period? Then, okay, then let's wait with investments till the situation becomes more clear. And last but not least, the financial situation, as I said already before, over-indebtedness. We need increasing interest rates, which also requires financial instruments put forward to SMEs, which help them. And here we have to differentiate two different things. While financial support for investment in sustainability in projects which may be profitable in a midterm perspective, investment loans can be a successful and a sufficient instrument. But if we look into the problem with the energy costs, we strongly warn against using liquidity support or loans help SMEs to cover the higher energy prices, because this will not pay back in future. So therefore, we need price compensation measures. We need either grants to the company to buy higher energy to higher prices, or we would need price caps on the energy side. But this problem cannot be solved with loans. And here I want to finish with the remark from Miriam about the Malta. So we know from many examples, Germany, Austria, Belgium, that if you provide financial instruments to an SME to invest in sustainability, these instruments are not taken up as long as they are not accompanied by high quality advisory services and to the insurance that they have access to the needed technologies. SMEs as such are not able to understand well enough how this energy efficiency investment can be taken and what are the profitability out of them. Because all of the national agencies who are providing SME financial instruments for sustainability investments tell us it only will be taken up if you combine this with advisory services. And this was my last point, and I'm looking forward to an interesting debate. Thank you.
Thank you, Gerhard. That was extremely interesting. I had some very clear takeaways, and for the first part of your presentation in particular, it aligns very much with what we saw in our new SME financing scoreboard that will be out next year. That the war and this energy crisis has really put a halt in sort of the recovery that had gotten underway in 2021, and so indeed the outlook for the end of 2022 and early next year is much less positive. I think your presentation brought out very clearly that while SMEs have a preoccupation at the moment is just getting through the day, basically being able to continue their operations in the face of these very strong energy price increases, that they are nevertheless willing and interested in making the necessary investments for sustainability. And this is not just a question of finance, as you pointed out at the very end, that there are other factors that come into play, and notably the supply chain issues, awareness issues, regulatory, and so on. So this is extremely important to keep in mind. And with that, I think that we can turn to our third presenter. So Peter Sweetman has spent 30 years in finance, 18 of which have been on climate finance and energy efficiency. He's the chief executive of Climate Strategy and Partners, which is a strategic consulting group in clean energy, clean technology, innovation, and energy efficiency. Peter is also the chairman and founder of Energy Efficiency Capital Advisors, an expert solution provider and finance structuring partner for over 60 million euros of finance for energy savings and on-site power in Spanish cities. And indeed, we're going to now turn to the case of Spain and maybe hear a slightly different or more detailed perspective on how Spain's SMEs are tackling the current situation. Peter, I understand that we're very privileged today to get a sneak preview of a new study that you'll be releasing next week on how SMEs in Spain are dealing with the current crisis. It would be great to hear from you how Spanish SMEs are being impacted, how they view the urgency of the green transition, and what kind of actions they're taking. And of course, we'd also be interested in your views on the main actions that other actors should take, governments and financing institutions, to spur sustainable investments by SMEs in the current context. You have the floor.
Well, thank you. Thank you, Celine. Thank you, Miriam. It's a great honor to be presenting here to your SME financing initiative here at the OECD. And I must say, thank you very much, Ana Paula from Portugal. Portugal has always been, I think, a leader in energy efficiency and these types of activities. And Gerhard, what I'm about to show from Spain is very much echoing a lot of the same messages. So let me jump in, and you're right, Miriam. This presentation is something which my colleague Adriana is going to present tomorrow morning in the SDG 7 pavilion of the United Nations in Egypt, Sharm el-Sheikh COP27. And then next week, we'll also be doing a session with the International Chamber of Commerce, who were also a partner in this project. So you can see here some of the sort of bottom left of the slide, you can see some of the partners that we've worked with. So the Spanish Chamber of Commerce, the Green Growth Group in Spain, the SME Climate Hub, the Climate Reality Project, and then a whole group of both expert reviewers and SME organizers in Spain. And that really sort of allowed us. So, of course, you all know, and this I think goes without saying, in Spain, we have 2.9 million SMEs. That's 99% of all registered companies. That's 65% of the employment in the country, representing 62% of the gross value add of all Spanish businesses, and being responsible for over half of the greenhouse gas emissions of Spain. And as Oliver Schwab said at the World Economic Forum this year, the sustainability and innovation questions that face SMEs is really the turning point for animating the local and regional economies to the transition. So a nice sort of chart to start us off, and one of the reasons why the European Climate Foundation funded this work was that the SME Climate Hub was launched in COP26, and a lot of the studies that came out in the prior year really highlighted the fact that SMEs were not receiving the attention that large companies had received until that time with respect to the transition. So what we did is, coming out of COP26, where we presented a guide of best practices to large company sort of energy transition and climate action plans, we decided that for COP27, we needed to go out and talk to, and in fact, listen to Spanish businesses. So we ended up engaging with 450 companies, 309 of those were SMEs. We did that through a consultation process supported by over 90 sort of platforms, that's local hubs, regional hubs, national organizations in Spain. We did over 30 informal meetings and interviews with SMEs and those platforms. We hosted 9 virtual workshops for our work, and we produced in the report 9 case studies of action. So in geographical terms, this is a map of Spain. You'll recognize that. What we've done here is we've just put dots on, so those 90 hubs, that's kind of where they are physically. And then the sort of big red dots with the lines connected connects to the 9 case studies of the real companies who we can refer to, and the report in detail describes, because I think for me, it's fascinating to hear the results en masse, and then it's important to listen specifically to the voices of real SMEs. And those pictures there are the pictures of the people who we've been interviewing and who appear in our work. So just starting at the higher end, so of course, SMEs in Spain are feeling the impacts of the energy crisis. So we asked this question, which was, how much? So 78% clearly feeling it at least some, 35% a fair amount, and 10% a lot. So that's the distribution there of how much impact it's having. And 60% of SMEs in Spain see climate change as a clear risk to their business. A very startling and I think sort of clear. We had the hottest summer on record. I think Spain is a dry country, where the impacts of climate change are really very clear for everyone to see. So then, as we dug down to discover whether or not these SMEs have targets for reducing greenhouse gases, the majority have partial targets, 41%. Around a third do not have targets, and about 30% or 28% do have a net zero target. Remember, the Spanish economy has a net zero target itself. Then with respect to climate action plans, so one of the things my firm's quite clear on is having a target is one thing, but setting it into motion and operationalization, and the operationalization of the plan is really the next step. 38% of the sample of companies do have climate action plans. 19% didn't know what they were, and then 62% or 2/3 do not have a climate action plan. Clearly, that for our sort of work shows that there's some way to go. And so when we did ask, so where have you been doing specific climate actions? This is the response. So around 40% are involved in some form of recycling. 38% have implemented some form of energy efficiency. 31% have some form of on-site renewable power production. 26% have looked into electric vehicles and sustainable transport. 21% have been talking to their suppliers to get green or to purchase better. A fifth have done none of the above, and 15% have been involved in eco-design. So when we talk, we produce guides and help materials to support the SMEs, which will be launched again at COP. But what was quite sort of interesting to us is that around 60% of the SMEs have not yet calculated their carbon footprint. So that's a bigger percentage than those that are acting. So what we discovered actually is that a lot of SMEs are indeed doing things, but they're not doing things in a particularly structured way. And that's also very much or very clear in terms of their lack of what you would call internal climate governance. So whilst some of them are talking to stakeholders, around a third, 24% disclose their greenhouse gas emissions footprint, 33% have designated a green board member or a climate defender, 18% disclose climate action, 11% linked executive pay to climate targets, and 10% link overall pay to climate targets. So again, a little bit echoing what Gerhard just said, 42% of those active really do feel pressure from their stakeholders. So of those stakeholders, the largest one is customers, then it's employees, then it's suppliers, and then it's the government. And the main barriers, again, to pick the two big ones here, 48% referred to a lack of funding, and 43% referred to a lack of knowledge. Other barriers included lack of time, 21%, and the lack of skills, 16%. So when we provide recommendations and when we talk to SMEs, they say they'd like external financial support, they'd like legislative support, they'd like guidelines and practices, and they'd also like training. So just getting to the end, and this is a subset of the recommendations, I thought it would be useful for the international discussion to say, so what is it that we conclude in Spain that SMEs actually need? So a more structural approach. So that means people working in common areas with similar steps. So that means people in the fashion industry working with those in the fashion industry, people in manufacturing working with manufacturers, and so on and so forth. Because classically, and again, we've seen it in Germany, where they have some quite good sort of networks that promote energy efficiency, the famous energy efficiency networks. It's good to build sustainability practice networks within subsectors that kind of know each other or do similar things. I think that's absolutely key. And within Spain, there's a very strong regional sort of character to SMEs that we've noticed. And I think there's definitely an opportunity here for regional best practice networks to start to promote more. And certainly that was clear from the hubs that we talked to, that was definitely necessary. SMEs, I think, so it's interesting. I mean, I run an SME. We lean heavily on our external auditors to help us prepare financial accounts, to deal with legal and administrative issues. And for the we a long time ago at Climate Strategy started calculating our footprint way back when we founded the company, actually in 2010, and we've been double offsetting since then, of course. But we of course had to train our own external auditors to take our financial information and take our bills and turn it into energy expenditures, and then go to a website where the government had provided to convert that into CO2 emissions, direct, indirect, and so on. But that is now a much more easy to do process. There's many tools available to SMEs to do that. And I think really it's their accountants who can be providing that service bundled in the existing services that they provide to SMEs. Then there's the question of public funding. I was very glad to hear Ana Paula talk about how the recovery plans in Portugal have been focusing particularly on helping SMEs deal with climate mitigation issues. For us, there's a clear sense, and it sounded from the way Portugal's doing it, that the best practice here is to identify those that have the biggest footprints. Clearly, we want to be supporting sort of on a materiality basis those that have the biggest potential to reduce greenhouse gases first. And I think that's absolutely best practice in that space. And then I also heard the examples given by Celine earlier of Austria and Ireland, where they are proactively looking for ways through a green tax reform to provide things like tax relief on the green products. Accelerated depreciation on energy efficiency is one area I know in industry that is very important, and to ensure that those who are providing green products and services can get a slightly higher price, and that they're not having to tackle fossil fuel subsidies or other hidden sort of benefits to not doing green things. So I think there's definitely Spain, I think, is a laggard in this particular area, and I think there's a lot that can be done here. And then finally, and this is really my last slide, I think we just need to recognize the leaders in the SME community. I mean, there are so many, and I could give you good examples from Spain of organizations doing quite remarkable things, which are just lost, I think. And we're working with a media sort of consultancy at the moment to promote some of the actors and some of the leaders that we have discovered in this trip. And I think there's definitely an opportunity to highlight the winners and to give people the sense that it's not all doom and gloom. And there are companies out there who've derived a sort of sustainable competitive advantage from acting early. So that's kind of it for my opening words. You can download the full report. I mean, beware, it's 120 pages. You can just shine your phone at the QR code. You can go to our social media and you can download it. It's Climate ST on Twitter and other things. And we are more than happy to share all the results and to keep the conversation going. Thank you, Miriam.
Peter, Thank you so much. That was really very, very enriching. The questions that you asked in your survey are really the ones that we've been trying to get at, and so the responses shed a lot of light on well, like you said, the glass half full. You know, on some of the positive aspects that SMEs are indeed taking action, but on the other hand, maybe they're not doing it in the most effective way, and that other support providers can be leveraged to help them do that. So that was extremely interesting. It's now going to be time to open the floor for discussion. But before we do, Peter, you mentioned when we spoke in preparation for this event that you had some examples, some telling examples of how individual SMEs, what kind of actions they're actually taking. I mean, Spain is a country that's very impacted by climate change, but also has a lot of resources in terms of you know, sunlight and others. So could you just share maybe one or two brief examples of what you've learned through your consultations?
Yes, delighted, absolutely. So one of our case studies in the report is a furniture manufacturer. They build outdoor furniture, and they a number of years ago decided that they wanted to reduce their energy bills, and they installed a big solar array in the space that they had next to their factory. And it wasn't just the fact that they'd installed the solar array, they then changed the shift hours, the shift work in the factory to better match the energy peak loads because solar, of course, only produces most of its or the maximum peak of its energy during the middle of the day. You know, it goes up obviously with the sun and so on and so forth. So they changed the way the company operated in order to maximize the power using pieces of the process. Obviously, when you're painting a piece of furniture, you don't need too much energy, but when you're sort of nailing it or cutting the wood and you're using the machines, then you do. So they did more than just install solar panels. They also adapted their processes, and it's that adaptation that we also hear many times from SMEs. Another one thought that it wanted to change its logistical fleet from a traditional fossil fuel fleet to an electrical fleet, and then discovered by trial and error really discovered sort of where they'd have to install the chargers because you know, the fleets had sort of different types of ranges, and they needed to make sure that the drivers had different sort of hour shifts, and so it ended up being a transitional shift, and then a sort of a reinvention a little bit of the businesses done very much in partnership with their customers, because if you need an electric charge station in a customer's premises, then you have to work with them in a different way. That working with customers, also one of our companies was a rural spa hotel. They previously had been driving their sheets in a van from an external company 100 kilometers away to get them washed and then brought back. When they did their carbon calculation, they saw these sheet miles essentially on the fuel costs of their suppliers, and so they got together to start a laundromat walking distance from the hotel, which also provided services sort of to the local people living in that area. So it was kind of a win-win. They got a new business in town. They could not. So I guess the point I'm making is oftentimes it's quite interesting and exciting engaging with the stakeholders inside the company to deliver something which looks on the face of it as if it's sustainable, and then ends up adapting the business model and then creates competitive sort of alternatives as a result.
Thank you. That's a great example of a win-win that you just mentioned. So now I'd like to open the floor for questions and comments. We have our discussion, our panelists largely reflected the European market and European SMEs, but if there are other colleagues from other parts of the world who want to also weigh in, if any of the speakers wish to ask questions to the other speakers, please use the raise your hand function. And I also remind you that we have the chat where you can share information as well. We already have a few pieces of information shared there, including an announcement from the Bankers for Net Zero and the British Business Bank about a simpler initiative to create a simpler and shared SME reporting framework, SME finance reporting framework, which is something also that you mentioned, Peter. So please, now the floor is open. Yes, we have Maria from the OECD Secretariat.
Hi, everyone. Thank you very much for the very insightful presentations. I had a question for, I mean, Peter mentioned it, but maybe Gerhard can also weigh in on this, and perhaps Ana Paula as well from the perspective of Portugal. But I was just wondering, the question of access to finance as being one of the major barriers. I was wondering if you have had the opportunity to explore this a little bit further in terms of what maybe the underlying issues there. Is it about sort of the traditional barriers of accessing finance in general, or is it about the availability of specific financing schemes and options for specifically for sustainability? Is it about the cost of financing? Any of those insights would be very helpful. Thank you.
Thank you, Maria. We also have a question from in the chat about how SMEs can access carbon footprint tools that are reliable, and how to discern, among the many different kind of initiatives out there. So if our speakers could possibly weigh in on that as well, I turn the floor back to you. I don't know who would like to start. Feel free to jump in.
Yeah,
Gerhard?
if you want. To be very frank, when we ask our members at the moment, access to finance is not one of the biggest issues. It's next to energy prices, it's still skills and supply chain disruptions, which are mentioned as a bigger problem than access to finance. At the same time, of course, we are in a situation after the COVID crisis that SMEs are even more over in debt or have high debt ratios than we have seen in normal times. And this is a barrier to do especially risky investments. So it's not our impression is not the lack of liquidity available on the market. It's more question is if you do something which is a little bit more risky than buying a new machine, that the risk-taking aspect is the bigger problem. And therefore, it is, of the one side, helpful that the European, at least the European financial instruments allow now also giving guarantees and support for, let's say, quasi-equity financing, also for sovereign loans and this kind of stuff. But also with the sustainability guarantee and with the new forms of innovation support, just to provide financial instruments, even in form of loans, which carrying more risk than traditional SME guarantees or classically SME loans. So this is a little bit the situation. Of course, there are a small group of companies which are also looking for equity finance, for venture capital, for business angel finance, etc. But the majority of our members are still looking for loan and loan-related finance, which allows them to control the company. At the same time, it's also very interesting. There was a big fears after the COVID crisis that there will be an increase of non-performing loans, etc., etc. So far, we don't see this. So we banks reporting us that even in countries which more problems with this non-performing loans, say 85 to 90% of SMEs are paying back their loans with not without problems, but they are paying them back. And we have still no significant increase in insolvency procedures. So this situation is still quite stable, but this may change radically when now SMEs starting to make losses, even in not only in energy intensive sector, but also in the retail sector, for example, due to the high energy prices. And here we don't see yet a clear picture what will be the situation in 2 months, depending very much on the rollout of the support measures we see at the moment.
If I can jump in and quickly amplify sort of that, I think, Gerhard, it depends a little bit where you are as an SME. To some extent, I think if you're in Germany or Austria, you're going to have less of a financing problem than if you're in Spain and Portugal. But also, I don't want to, perhaps that's too easy an answer. I also want to say that when we do a survey, I think people often blame lack of financing. It covers a multitude of sins. Like the term "I can't afford it" sometimes isn't really the real answer. It's the sort of partial answer. So when you do a survey, you don't, with 400 different counterparties, you can't sort of dig in too much to that. But I suspect that it might be to do with the fact that sometimes it's easier as an SME to get financing for a solar array than corporate financing, because you've got an asset that backs the money. And so therefore it depends sometimes on what you're asking for the money for. And as Anna Paula pointed out, there is high availability of recovery funds specifically for climate purposes. So I think to some degree, it's partially because the SMEs don't know how to ask for that money or don't know how to get to it, and it's not that easy. So therefore, they're not asking for the right things of the right people. So I think there's a lot of things going on. There was a question about what tools are available. So we work with the SME Climate Hub. They have a tool which has been programmed by a firm called Normative that's working with Google. And that's quite an easy to use tool. There's one which has just been launched by Sage, which is a large kind of accountancy software provider. I know, and there are lots of others. In Spain, that all of the regional hubs have variations of tools translated into Spanish and other things. And then if you sort of will permit me, there's some things here about the Jevons paradox, which is tenant owner problems, which is sort of how do SMEs deal with the fact they don't always own the buildings that they work from? How do they deal with rented premises? I think there's no easy answer to that. Green leases is something which is taking off in the UK, and that's definitely an area that we've been working on. That's where essentially the interests of the owner and the tenant are aligned. Tenant gets lower energy bills, and the owner gets a more valuable property in many cases. And then Fiona asks, "Are you carrying this engagement on in Spain?" The answer is we absolutely are. Next year, we're looking forward to essentially we've produced 9 recommendations, and we're going to try ourselves together with our SME partners to develop all 9 of them. So please get in touch if that's something of interest to you.
Just to add just some thoughts, and totally agreeing with what Peter said about, I think it's important the communication. Sometimes there's a lot happening, and sometimes SMEs don't know exactly what are the most addressed instruments for them, or don't have time sometimes also because they are just dealing with daily basis problems, and that's an issue that we need to work on. And another aspect, and looking at the European funding, for instance, and when talking with our industry stakeholders, they say that the system, for instance, is very competitive and often not in line with the real industry gaps, market and company needs and timings, and sometimes it's in terms more difficult to respond effectively to short and medium-term requirements and prepare to the future. In industry perspective, they say, the SMEs, they say that we could be thinking about SME target programs that are most relevant to innovation should be small scale, rapid response, short term, with low application and administration overhead, targeting innovation closer to the market, and ideally evaluated and monitored by business experts. We have conscious of this and we are working on it, but I think it's still some aspects and some problems that need to be working on more and more. So that's just what I would like to say. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for all the comments and questions also in the chat. It's coming in, they're coming in fast and furious. We still have a few more minutes. If there are other further interventions that people would like to make or other questions, comments, please raise your hand. I see one hand raised. Let me, yes, that's Marco Marchesi from the OECD. Marco.
Yes, thank you, Miriam. No, very interesting presentation from all of the speakers. I would have like 3 different questions maybe, but I mean, each for one different speaker. So I don't know if that's too much, but maybe we can get short answers. The first one is for Ana Costa Paula from Portugal, because you mentioned that Portugal is thinking, or anyway, the plan is that they're going to meet the sort of like climate change objectives like 5 years in advance, if I understood correctly, instead of 2035, like 2030, so like the sort of like midterm objectives. And I was thinking how the government managed to come to that conclusion, because we see that actually in many cases the trajectory in gas emissions actually are not going in the right direction for many countries. So many many countries are, we can see that the trajectory is not they are not on the right track. And I mean, as you saw, for example, today, like last week on The Economist, where I even talks about dropping the 1.5 degree objective of climate change because it's not realistic. So I was thinking, just if you could tell us about how the government of Portugal came to the conclusion and what kind of policies is implementing to make this objective happen. And of course, if there is anything which is specifically related to the area of SME policy, that would be very, very interesting. So a bit more understanding how you go to that conclusions and what kind of policies you're putting in place, especially from an SME policy perspective. Then I have a question, if I can continue on, Miriam. Yeah, okay. The second one is for Gerhard Humer from SME United, and has to do with the issue of indebtedness. Because I must say that within CFE, we have been struggling a bit to understand exactly what is the current situation with this, in the sense that we have conflicting views and sometimes indicators. For example, for 2021, in the recent issue of the scoreboard, highlights, so not the flagship full publication, but the short version that we publish it on odd years. We see that actually outstanding loans are decreasing for most countries, which means SMEs are paying back their loans. And in some cases, we also know that, for example, in the UK and maybe some other countries, there was evidence that SMEs were taking loans during the COVID-19 crisis, but really just to keep it as deposit, just in like as a sort of like backup for the rainy days. But then they didn't use it actually, because anyway, the economy was closed, business were closed, there was no activity. There were other policies like grants, subsidies. So I just wonder if you have any view about how big is this problem, whether it's really like something that can prevent investment, or whether it's something which is a bit more something which we believe it's happening, but actually then in the reality, the sort of debt that was taken was not real debt. It was just sort of like backup money that is being given back now that the economy was picking up, at least in 2021. And the last one is very simple, from our colleague and friend from Climate Strategy. We're always interested in new policies, and this is the first time that I hear about green lease. So if you can tell us a little bit more about what it is. Thank you. Sorry for it was too long.
Thank you, Marco. No, that's fine. If each of you maybe could respond in just a minute and a half, that would be great.
I probably could start. And thank you, Marco, for the question. And what I've said, it's this is we are at what the Prime Minister announced last Tuesday, is that we are going to study the feasibility of bringing for the carbon neutrality to 2045 or 5 years, but we didn't, at least concerning what I know, we will study. But of course, for instance, we are very focused on, or very keen on the cluster, hydrogen cluster, for instance, it's very, very important for us, and we are very focused on that. And it's intended that the hydrogen, it's one of the solutions for the decarbonization of economy. So I don't have an answer at the moment. I don't have elements at the moment. It was an announcement or at COP. It was a speech of our Prime Minister. But I just want to stress that my presentation just to underline the commitment that we have under our recovery and resilience plan, under our budget law for the next year, that we are very, very committed to try to do our best to achieve the goals, and probably would like to try to do a little better on the time frame. That's what I can do for what I can say for the moment. Thank you.
Okay, I think, Marco, you are right with your view that there are quite a lot of companies have taken loans in their companies which haven't been used during the COVID crisis and are now paid back, especially also not only because they haven't been used, but also the costs are slightly increasing for them. And this is also the observation we hear, for example, from the Italian banking associations, go in the same direction. In addition, there's another observation that the figures from the Commission hint that only 1/3 of the money which was offered by governments to help SMEs and companies during the COVID crisis has been used in reality. Therefore, the dramatic is on over-indebtedness and solvency problematic was after the COVID crisis pandemic much lower or less pronounced than we have expected a year ago when we had the first discussions on this. What we, however, see at the moment is that the total lending volume is going down. The conditions for loans are tightening. This has, of course, also to do not only with recession expectations, but also to do with the interest rate increases by the central bank, etc. And therefore, if you take away these public support programs, be it loan guarantees or whatever, or sustainable finance programs, it is for SMEs which want to do more than a very typical risk-free financing. It becomes more difficult now to access money if there's any risk behind. Yeah? And then say, okay, if you just do put solar panels on, this is less risk. Yeah, we have other problems with the projects. But if you do something which is a little bit innovative, which hasn't happened before, banks are very shy to finance this such projects, and therefore, and this has a little bit to do with over-indebtedness, because a bank, if you have already, and it's normal figures, if you have 80 to 90% debt ratio in your balance sheet, then it's difficult to take additional risks, to get financing for additional risks from the market. And then you need the public support instruments. And these are not in all countries in the same amount available. As Peter rightly said before, the situation in Germany is of course different, but not only from the south, but also between Germany and Netherlands is a huge difference about the availability of finance, for example.
If I can jump in and just pick up the question from Mario on green leases. So green leases are a concept that's been developed actually for many years through the commercial real estate sector, specifically driven by investors in the UK. But nevertheless used as a best practice benchmark by the Institutional Investor Group on Climate Change, IGCC, who I'm sure you know. I'm currently working with them on an activity due to finish next year, but their members are very vocal on the need to find contractual means to align the interests of commercial tenants with buildings owners. And that's exactly, so the green lease itself, there is a template of it. It's been pushed around sort of for many years and improved and used by pension fund managers. So essentially the drive comes from the final asset owner, the final asset owner wants to deal with the financing emissions, so scope 3 from the perspective of the financial institution, and it needs to align its objectives and outcomes, economic outcomes, with its tenants. And so the clauses of the green lease, the model green lease contract is available, promoted by Green Buildings Council and others. And I think that it is, it's a legal practice, but it's soft legal as opposed to regulatory. And I think a lot more can be done, thinking now in the broader sense, by governments who want to put this forward as a model to also get over some of the sort of misalignments of interest that also exist between commercial real estate holders and tenants in the areas of fixed and capped and limited rent increases in an inflationary period, when tenants are obviously feeling the economic squeeze of inflation, and yet we need investments also going into those buildings. So I think it's a fairly fertile moment, in fact, economically speaking, macroeconomically speaking, for those types of bargains to be done. So rate rises, but that the money goes into energy savings, netting out to be beneficial to the tenants as well as the buildings owners.
Thank you. Thanks everyone for your questions, very interesting questions. I think we've had a very rich discussion. We're running short on time. I won't aim to fully summarize, but maybe just a few main points that I think we've agreed on. I think we all agree on the urgency of the issue. In the current context of this energy crisis, we obviously need to go beyond short-term measures that relieve the price increases in the moment, but we must continue to foster sustainability investments over the longer term. I think it's clear that SMEs are being impacted by the current crisis to differing degrees, yet they need to move ahead and continue their transition, their green transition. We noted that there were sector-specific differences and also differences across regions within Europe. Finance, which was at the surface, the main topic of this webinar, well, we find that it's often wrapped up with other issues. We heard about how this is linked with the challenges of obtaining skilled labor to actually implement the investments, how this is being impacted by supply chain disruptions. We heard that finance is often in the surveys of SMEs, it's often a catch-all. That actually, if you dig a bit deeper, you realize that there are other challenges underneath. But I think that maybe in the same way, support for finance can be a way to bundle in other types of support to address these related issues. We also heard that the availability of finance depends very much on the type of investments being made. And we heard that we heard about the importance of pairing financial support with non-financial support. This is also one of the main findings of our own report that we'll be releasing in a couple of weeks' time. We also were able to hear about some novel solutions, mobilizing different kinds of actors and partnering with them. We heard about owners and tenants, accountants, other actors in the ecosystem. So I think it's very much just as the challenges are wrapped up in the ecosystem, the solutions can also be found in the ecosystem. I would just conclude now by reminding everybody, so this was, as Celine mentioned, this was the fourth webinar that we had this year. I think in the 1 year of the platform operations, we've managed to make a lot of progress. We've gotten a clearer picture of the landscape for sustainable finance and the baseline that SMEs are starting from. We also have been able to get a better understanding of the challenges that financial institutions themselves face in accompanying their SME clients on the journey to net zero. And we've been able to contribute to high-level discussions within the G20 and other fora, notably through developing a principle on sustainable finance for SMEs within the 2022 update of the G20 OECD high-level principles on SME financing. But of course, there is still so much left to do. We're really still at the beginning of this journey of sharing our knowledge and identifying solutions. And the platform will continue its work next year, of course. We plan to engage an increasing number of actors from the ecosystem, as we were just mentioning how important that is to develop those partnerships. And we will also continue to work to achieve some common understanding on some of the key prerequisites for financial institutions to be equipped to supply sustainable finance for SMEs. A sort of try to achieve some convergence on the pieces of information that SMEs will need to provide to obtain that such financing, and how that process can be made easier for them through different types of partnerships. So I would just remind you that we have our next calendar, our next agenda point is in a few weeks' time. On the 7th of December, we will be holding an annual conference at the OECD in Paris. It will be an exciting event. We'll be launching our report. We'll be announcing some new initiatives and some new partnerships for the platform. I hope you can join us. If you need more information, please contact us. We'll be happy to send you the information to join this conference. And of course, we look forward to continuing the dialogue through the webinars starting again next year. So with that, I'd like to thank our speakers, thank all participants, thank our members, the British Business Bank, the Business Development Bank of Canada, and the Industrial Bank of Korea, and look forward to continuing the conversation. Thank you so much, everyone. Have a great afternoon.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thanks.
Bye-bye. Thank you.